1992. It seems a very long time indeed since I was appointed, and I suppose since that moment we all of us have gone through some extraordinary challenging times over the last few years. We found ourselves doing things that we never thought we'd do in ways we never thought we would do them. And in the midst of all this, I'm incredibly grateful to so many of you who found the time and the energy to welcome me and Emily, Jonathan and Joseph to York. It's been a real pleasure to move in here, and it seems to me that the strength and achievements of St Peter's School are only matched by the warmth and generosity of the people who work here. So this first term for me, and much of the first year, are going to present a massively steep learning curve. So please forgive me when I don't know where I am, what I'm doing, what your name is, or what my name is. There's quite a bit to get my head around in the weeks ahead, and I'm going to rely very heavily on your support and your forbearance. I'm going to do my best to get out and about into houses and departments and the various areas of the school over the weeks ahead, so please rest assured if I do turn up in your area that I'm not there to expect you, I'm probably just lost. By the same token, please do come and seek me out whenever you like and ask any questions. I probably won't have all the answers for you, or indeed any of the answers for you in the first few weeks, but I'll do my best to help you. One of the key roles that I will be taking on is that of the designated safeguarding lead, and in a few moments I want to walk you through the statutory updates to your training for this year. Before I do so, I want to embarrass Antonia by thanking her enormously for the extraordinary work that she's done since January last year. Not only has she worked tirelessly to ensure that I've had everything I needed as I started out, but actually she's put the school in an exceptionally strong position, and I'm delighted that she's going to be taking up a critical role of mental health lead. And I think it's only right to embarrass her with that. So I'm delighted that Antonio will continue to work alongside me in the years ahead and in this new capacity. So as you know, the school has established a mental health team which she's going to be leading. And the purpose of this team is to develop the school's strategy for mental health, to provide an open, safe and supportive culture that promotes positive mental health and in which needs are identified and responded to. To achieve this, Jessie Evans, our mental health nurse, will coordinate referrals and one-to-one support working with Simon Garland, who's now our school counsellor. Details of the team and how to refer pupils are going to be emailed to you following the presentation, but please do contact Antonio if you have any questions. Now, I'm aware that the briefing I'm about to give is going to have a different degree of relevance to you depending on what your role is within the school. Fundamentally, however, safeguarding is and should be at the centre of everything we do, no matter what our role. That said, if anything I say this morning is unclear, or I've spoken too fast, or you're left with concerns or worry about how an aspect of the information affects your particular area, do come and see me and speak to me about it, or drop me an email. None of what I can say is particularly complicated, and many of the procedures that we have are simply what any sane, right-thinking person would do under normal circumstances anyway. My first foray into the world of education was actually a 6-month spell working for a playgroup in the deep south of Dorset. And one of the jobs that fell to me was the organisation of the end-of-year celebratory trip to a local attraction which called itself somewhat ambitiously Adventure Wonderland. Describing itself as a theme park in its own promotional literature, it managed rather majestically to disappoint in almost every regard. There were 8 rides, 7 of which were permanently outboarded. The remaining thrill experience was the Hungry Caterpillar, a gargantuan beast stuffed with nightmares, which ambled ominously around a figure of 8 course at a speed somewhere between your grandmother's mobility scooter and a man on the way to the gallows. During the memorable Christmas season, an intoxicated Father Christmas had fallen asleep with a child on his lap. Rudolph turned out to be a donkey with a reindeer headband glued to him, and one of the elves taught supplying drugs to miners. The place had become something of a more celeb in the preceding summer, when a young girl had both fallen from a badly constructed tubular slide, spraining her wrist, and also discovered a piece of meat in a sandwich which looked suspiciously human. Nonetheless, the place continued to offer misery as a premium to anyone who was willing to pay. I was, of course, such a person, and I dutifully booked in a coach and tickets for 30 under 4s to experience firsthand what would have happened had Lewis Carroll combined Alice in Wonderland with the Grapes of Wrath. The day arrived, and the pupils boarded the coach in a Haribo-induced fever of excitement, which would quickly exhaust our supply of plastic bags. I made sure that everybody had their seatbelts on and announced to the eager bunch of little faces that we were all off to Adventure Wonderland. There was general whooping and a rush of excitement through the bus. As I sat down, wondering if redirecting the driver to simply drive around Milton Keynes for a couple of hours might not prove more scintillating, the little girl next to me, Megan was her name, looked up, clutching the leaflet for Adventure Wonderland tightly in her hands, and very able to speak with excitement, she whispered to me, wide-eyed, "Is it in the sky?" It's our job, of course, all of us who are in any way involved in education, to bring children into connection with the world. Much of that is exciting and fun and rewarding, and it is, of course, an enormous privilege to watch children grow up and develop into young adults with empathy, understanding, and confidence. It's sometimes, however, children encounter the world before they're ready to do so, or they encounter aspects of the world they really should never encounter. The naivety and open-book nature of a child's mind is a wonderful and a precious thing, but with that innocence comes an intense vulnerability. It's therefore our responsibility, no matter how tangentially we interact with children on site, not only to understand some of the possible concerns that could arise and know how to react to them, but to work together seamlessly to create a culture of safety in which any people can experience the magic of learning in confidence and security. Safeguarding is the most important thing we do. It is not simply a case of protecting children from unwanted external influences, gone are the old days of stranger danger. As an organisation, we have to be proactive and engaged at all times. And we are living through interesting times. The world over the last decade has become, you can see, newly self-aware. There have been seismic shifts in approaches, attitudes, behaviours, language and understanding of who and what we are, both as individuals and as a society. We are constantly confronted with dialogue, argument and controversy on questions of race, of gender, of age, of religion and of personal principles. Alongside this, there's a separate dialogue about free speech and expression of opinion. In a world where social media has allowed public comment to be anonymous, incessant and indelible, and where what one does not say has become as open as what one does. So if that situation appears confusing and fast moving to us, how much more confusing then must it be for children in our care? Our responsibility is not to shield children from these issues or construct around them some sort of attitudinal sword which cocoons them merrily until they move on to university. Instead, we must help them as best we can and entirely objectively to understand and engage with concepts and discussions which are likely to dominate the landscape they experience as adults, and which may well already be enormously significant to them in forming their worldview. Any of us who operate in this environment are, by very definition, role models for these children. Interactions in the classroom are just one piece in a wider, broader sense of education. Safeguarding then feeds into the critical work being done by the Equality and Diversity Group, led by Sarah Obi, and I'm very much looking forward to our training on this topic tomorrow as we look to move forward in this area across the course of the year. Challenging our individual attitudes and approaches takes guts, and it's absolutely right that we do so. And I'm very excited about the prospect of working with Inclusion Labs to get a real sense of where our priorities should be. At the heart of the safeguarding policies and procedures in any school lies this document, Keeping Children Safe in Education, which sets out governance and policy. A summary of that document will be sent to you early next week, and it's important that you read it. You will, of course, now have completed your basic safeguarding training, and it's not my intention to reiterate many of those concepts here this morning. Instead, I want to take you through some of the core changes to the documentation this September, and some of those areas that have been specifically brought to our attention at updates. It's no surprise, in the context of the pandemic, that specific sections on mental health have been added into the document. Antonio and I and the rest of the team will be working carefully over the course of the term to try and understand a little bit more about the impact of these extraordinary months on the pupils at the school, and more will follow in due course in terms of training. It's worth reflecting that time appears to move much more slowly when you're a child than when you're an adult, and those months of uncertainty will have taken a significant toll. It's also worth stating that obvious point that periods of lockdown, self-isolation, and confinement would have put additional strain on relationships within the home. The bolstering of the school's mental health approach is therefore not just timely, but pretty essential. For now, two key pointers. If you think a pupil is experiencing a mental health issue, then please do refer it on. Don't attempt to diagnose it yourself or use medical language with the pupil or the parents. By all means, feel free to discuss your concerns and your thoughts with members of the mental health team, but try to keep your observations fully objective. Secondly, lest there be any confusion, if you're unsure whether a concern you have about a pupil is a mental health concern or a safeguarding concern, consider it a safeguarding issue and I'll make sure it gets dealt with in the right way. The other significant development in the document is expanded advice and guidance on peer-on-peer abuse. That is, abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, or neglect, which is carried out by pupils and directed at fellow pupils. This has always happened nationwide, but sadly has not always been tackled by schools in the way that it should be. Linked into this too is the concept of discriminatory bullying. Bullying which is based around a specific characteristic of a pupil or group of pupils. While we have, of course, updated our policies in line with the guidance, it's important that all of us are vigilant and mindful of the training we will all completed prior to the start of this term. Critical to this is the fact that any pupil experiencing this sort of behaviour is reassured that staff are taking their concerns seriously. They should never be given the impression that they're creating a problem or causing a fuss by reporting it. This means we need to guard against making value judgments or brushing behaviours off as kids being kids, or it's just a bit of banter. It's notable that the document refers explicitly to sexual harassment and misogyny. Every concern must be taken seriously and should be recorded using CPOMs. If you're at all unsure on how to use that system, please do come and chat with me. As we begin to gear up for the start of term, it's particularly important for us to be aware of the possibility of hazing or initiation rituals. Just because the school has not had a history of these activities doesn't mean that they won't happen, and we really must stay vigilant. The pandemic has meant that there will be contingents of pupils who haven't really experienced what is normal. And whether consciously or not, this is going to create a greater power divide than normal between those who are in the know and those who aren't. And Dane's going to talk to us in more depth about peer abuse shortly. I don't want to steal any further thunder. But at the core of the guidance is the common sense objective to create a culture in which this sort of thing is simply not tolerated. We don't want people feeling that they cannot come forward with concerns because aspects of behaviour, and particularly, for example, the use of sexualised language, are just acceptable. This goes for online interactions, obviously, as well as in person. The pandemic and the national lockdowns have accelerated children's online exposure, and it's vital that we stay on top of that and monitor it as far as we can. It's true that people seem wonderfully at home with technology, having grown up with it, but they're also innocent and naive, and their ability to self-monitor or to self-moderate or to apply sensible filters to what they do and say online does need some real work. The updated document also asks us to be mindful of child exploitation, which is divided into two separate categories: child criminal exploitation, which is where children are engaged in criminal activities, often under threat or through bribery. And sometimes activities like this are referred to as county lines, which is specifically connected into the use of children to assist with drug trafficking. Child sexual exploitation is different. This is where children are coerced into sexual activity or the creation of sexualized imagery. And sometimes this can be hard to detect because the pupil doesn't even know that they're being exploited and may actually genuinely believe that they're in a romantic relationship with their abuser. It's important to remember that both girls and boys can be involved in both types of exploitation, and guidance on some of those indicators is supplied in the guidance. Fundamentally, as always, we are looking for shifts and changes in the behaviours of the child. That's where those strong professional relationships come into play. Because we know the pupils so very well, we're much better placed to detect subtle alterations. The final shift in emphasis within the updated guidance deals with concerns about members of staff. The procedure for what to do if there's a concern or an allegation about a member of staff is laid out both in the safeguarding policy and the staff code of conduct, and that concern should, of course, be reported directly at headmaster. Now, this is straightforward where there is a disclosure from a pupil or a staff member, or where you've observed behaviour that is clearly inappropriate. What has changed in the guidance for this year is that schools are now required to have a procedure in place for low-level concerns. Now, a low-level concern is a smaller worry, perhaps nothing more than a nagging doubt that an adult working anywhere in the school may have acted in a way that is inconsistent with the staff code of conduct, is not strong enough to take forward as a formal allegation. Examples of this could include being over-friendly with pupils, taking photographs of personal devices, engaging with a child one-to-one in a secluded place, or using inappropriate, intimidating, or sexualised language. Now, it's important at this stage to be absolutely clear. We want teachers to have strong, healthy, professional relationships with pupils. That's what schools like this are built on, and it's what makes the education really strong. There's no desire to create some kind of police state. And furthermore, there is actually specific guidance provided for the school on how to deal with these concerns when they arise to protect the member of staff concerned. It would, however, be pretty prudent to check through the staff code of conduct, which is going to be circulated next week, and ensure that you're operating in line with the guidance. If you've got concerns about your particular area, then please come and speak to me about it. Finally, I just want to remind all of us about how we should respond if a pupil does make a disclosure. That initial report can be extremely important, and it's vital that the child in question feels supported and listened to all the way through. Firstly, if possible, the disclosure should be managed by 2 members of staff, where that's possible. And if possible, one of them should be the DSL or a deputy DSL. If there's an online element, you should not view or forward illegal images created or sent to the child. The DSL and the team will be able to provide you with advice on what to do in that scenario. When talking with the child, you should be supportive and respectful at all times. Use clear language that the child can understand, and don't make any judgments. Don't ask leading questions, and if you do need to prompt the child to move forward, then use open questions only. Don't put words in the child's mouth. If it feels appropriate, you can ask the child if they've been harmed and what the nature of that harm is. Stay fully engaged with the child during the interview, so take only very brief notes. It's important that the child making the disclosure feels they have your full attention and you're listening and supporting them. You should write out that report immediately after the incident, and when you do so, make sure you use the child's language and record only facts. Don't let your opinion feature. You should make a record of the disclosure to a CPOS and inform the DSL, either me or a deputy, as soon as possible. Sadly, in the case of safeguarding, it's vital that we continue to think the unthinkable, and we should never make a mistake of thinking, well, it could never possibly happen here. If anything's been unclear in this briefing this morning, please do come and speak to me or to one of the deputy DSLs. This is fairly heavy stuff, I know, especially at the start of term, but it really does matter that we get it right. Ultimately, we want every child who attends this school to feel safe, to feel valued, and to know that where they do have concerns, they can be listened to and we will act appropriately. Education is an enormous responsibility, but it's also a fantastic privilege. And I know that everyone in this room will be looking forward immensely to get back into normal rhythms and routines across the course of the next few weeks, and making sure that the experience of learning at St Peter's is as bold, dynamic, and vibrant as it always has been. I'm going to hand over to Antonia, who will introduce it.
Good morning. You'll all be aware of the Everyone's Invited website, which is set up by Sarah, who was a former pupil of the Abbey. She set up the website to highlight the great culture in schools and universities across the country, including independent schools. Since March, the site has received to date over 51,000 testimonials, anonymous testimonials, describing the experiences of pupils from sexual harassment through to sexual assault and some very disturbing accounts of rapes that have happened in and outside of school. In response, the government asked Ofsted to conduct an urgent review into sexual harassment and sexual abuse, and in doing so they spoke to a number of pupils, and I know Dale's going to reference this in his presentation to you. As a result of the review, there are a number of recommendations, one of which was that all school staff should be trained to understand sexual harassment and sexual violence and how to respond to it, not just a safeguarding team. In doing this, we hope that you will be able to better understand what sexual harassment is, sexual violence is, including in the online world as well as face-to-face, to be able to identify the early signs of peer-on-peer abuse, and to consistently uphold standards in our response, ensuring, as Morris has said, that it is not tolerated within our school community. So to deliver this training today, we're delighted to welcome Dale Wilkins to St Peter's. Dale is the Director of Safeguarding, Professional Development and Accreditation at SAPCA, which is the Safeguarding Child Protection Association, and and at the BSA Boarding Schools Association. Dale has over 30 years' experience in the child protection arena in education. He liaises with government, works closely on boarding inspection, and delivers training to schools. He's also been a multi-agency safeguarding trainer for the Dudley Safeguarding Children's Board. And having attended training given by Dale previously, I can assure you that it's extremely valuable and insightful, and I know that this training today will really help us all to address this very important aspect of safeguarding. Dale.
Right, just give me a couple of seconds to get myself set up.
I'm sure it's
It's great to be back. I've met many of you before. I've been here a couple of times to look at various different things. It's really good to be back. Much as you are in terms of getting used to whatever the new normal is going to be for this September, I'm trying to get used to the new normal of being out and about again. I spend most of my time now staring at the screen. It's my second face-to-face training this week. It's very strange doing it again after quite a while. There are some advantages and some disadvantages. The disadvantage for you is that you can't just switch you off and go and make a cup of tea. The advantage for me is you can't just switch your camera off and disappear, or you can't mute me either. You're unlikely to be left in a Haribo-induced frenzy, I fear. More likely, given the subject material, a PowerPoint-induced talk, but I apologise for that. What's my cut-off time?
That was about 20 minutes ago.
Yeah. As long as that until midday. Yeah, and obviously this is a really serious subject matter, and I'm going to bring together 4 different things. And I'm going to try and look at what the guidance says, what the evidence is, what the impact is, and what schools can do. Or what schools should do, what schools must do. It's going to be really important. And Maurice has already said that we're going to be focusing on keeping children safe in education 2021. You'll find my slides very content heavy, that's deliberate, so that when you get the slide back afterwards, you've got things you can go back to look at. I don't expect you to read the content of every individual slide as I go through it. I'll point out the key items. But what we will have at the end then is the relevant content with, where appropriate, the paragraph reference, keeping children safe in education, so that when you read through part 1, hopefully it will jog your memory of the stuff that we discussed this morning. And then on the right, you'll see some guidance called Sexual Violence and Sexual Harassment between children in schools and colleges, which came out yesterday. It replaced the version that was published in 2018. In true DFE style, the version that was published yesterday was slightly different from the draft, including moving some paragraph numbers around, which was really inconvenient, but there we go. So if you find that any of the paragraph references are not quite right, it's simply because I've been through and tried to change what I might do so. That document is really for school leaders, but I think it's really important that everyone should be aware that it exists, because it is effectively the guidance that tells us how to deal with these issues, because they are really challenging issues to deal with. So, let's look at keeping children safe in education, and part 5 links to the sexual violence and sexual harassment guidance. Part 5 is effectively a shorter form of the standalone guidance. Now, you're not required to read part 5, but just knowing that that's there, knowing that that's where the guidance links to, is really important, because part 1, safeguarding information for all staff, will have numerous references to it. So, the key thing that's also changed this year, in addition to all the things that Morris has really highlighted, is the fact that, I remember a few years ago, the expectation was you should read Keeping Children Safe in Education Part 1, and roughly first week of October, just before ISI was due, someone from HR would run around with a piece of paper saying, sign to say you've read it, sign to say you've read it. Then there was the expectation that you should understand it, and now schools are doing quizzes and bits of work to make sure you can demonstrate your understanding. And now it's about this phrase, discharging your responsibility. That you need to know what's in that document, because you need to know how it impacts on you and on your role. And a couple of paragraphs on Keeping Children Safe in Education that are relevant. It highlights all the things that staff should read: the child protection policy, the behaviour policy, the staff behaviour policy, the code of conduct, and the safeguarding responsible children going missing, and the role of the DSL. But, just going back, it also now highlights that which should, amongst other things, also include policy and procedures to deal with peer-on-peer abuse. So a real focus that this is everyone's responsibility. Everybody needs to know about peer-on-peer abuse and what to do about it. And again, this, which links very strongly to what Morris said a few moments ago, all staff being able to reassure victims that they're taken seriously and they'll be supported and kept safe. Now, how can you discharge that duty if you don't know what to do? So it's really important that you all understand what to do, all understand it's our responsibility, and understand the key theme of how we support victims, so you don't give the impression that they're creating a problem by reporting something, or that they feel ashamed by reporting. And we'll come up with some of the barriers to reporting later on. And again, about all staff being vigilant. All staff should always be vigilant and always raise any concerns with their designated safeguarding legal deputy. Now, I've somewhat flippantly, over a number of years, said that actually you could sweep away the whole of Keeping Children Safe in Education and replace it with the 4 words, act on any concerns. But I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I just want to focus on that word any. Act on any concerns. It doesn't matter to you whether what you bring forward is something which leads to a major safeguarding investigation, or whether it's actually something which proves to be something of nothing. From your point of view as a practitioner, I know it will feel very different depending on which way it goes. From your point of view as a practitioner, acting on it and reporting it are the key things you have to do. And I'll give you a very quick example from a colleague I worked with, who was a very young, very inexperienced member of staff, was actually a graduate assistant, only aged 22 or 23, who reported something to me on the Friday before half term, because of something she'd overheard, which led to a huge safeguarding investigation that took place over that half term holiday. And a number of things would happen if she hadn't. If she hadn't, there's a very serious chance the child would be in serious harm, and there's absolutely every chance that she would never have gone on to be a teacher, because she would have been so mortified by the fact she heard something hadn't reported. So always act on those concerns and make sure you report them through. And again, the indicators have been enhanced this year to highlight the fact, and this is in paragraph 29, that peer-on-peer abuse is a specific safeguarding issue. All staff should be aware of it in their school and college procedures, policy and procedures to deal with it. I do believe that for the English department, the typo there with the lack of apostrophe is actually now been updated, but it wasn't, so apologies, that's not my typo. And then, many of you, just hand up if you think you know what sexting is. Yeah? Okay? Good. That's great, because sexting is no longer the phrase that we use. As we'll find out later, a lot of research goes into the fact that part of the Ofsted review discovered that, and this has already been changed in guidance, young people don't actually use the term sexting. You talk to your young people about sexting, and they don't always understand that it links to an image or a video. They sometimes think that it's like texting, not just with sexy words. So the term sexting has changed, and we're now talking about consensual and non-consensual sharing of news and semi-nude. Okay? And of course videos are included in that. So, peer-on-peer abuse. Again, the other concept which is in Keeping Children Safe in Education is the idea that it can happen both inside and outside of school. And also it can happen online, of course. But it's really important that all staff should recognise the indicators and know how to identify it and know how to respond to reports. And when that's happening outside school, and when that's happening in the online world, that can be really, really difficult. So it's not just about picking up the absolutely obvious signs that are in front of you, it's also about picking up the signs, as I was saying earlier, about pupil behaviour and reporting any concerns about the way pupils are behaving, because you may be uncovering something where there's a situation that can be involved in peer-on-peer abuse. And again, all staff should understand that even if there are no reports in their schools or colleges, it doesn't mean it's not happening. And so Sarah, who Antonia mentioned a few moments ago, when she was talking to Girls' Schools Association, she made it really clear that although they published the list of all the schools who are named on the Everyone's Invited website, the ones she's worried about are the ones who are not named. Because if they're not named, they might reasonably assume that therefore there's not a problem. Her view is, it's going on in all schools, it has to be faced in all schools. And we have to assume it's happening, even if there's no evidence to show that it is, we have to assume that it's going on. And I'll go through some of the statistics later, and you will see that actually, for us to say that it's not happening, given some of the statistics, would be a real head in the sand. Okay, now, just give you a chance to read this through, because that leads into the definition. All staff to understand the importance of challenging inappropriate behaviours between peers, many of which are listed below, that are actually abusive in nature. And this is the key part. Downplaying certain behaviours just risks normalising. And the kinds of things you're talking about, just banter, just having a laugh, part of growing up, boys being boys, all these can lead to an unacceptable culture and lead to unacceptable behaviours, an unsafe environment, and of course we can end up with an environment where abuse is normalised. And a lot of this again comes through the Everyone's Invited testimonies and the Ofsted review highlights and all of this. So those are the specific references from keeping children safe in education. But it also goes on then to give you the definition of what peer abuse is. And the bits highlighted in red are the bits that have changed for this year. So if you have worked on this before, you're involved in the safeguarding side, and you're familiar with this kind of thing, this is how the definition has changed this year. Yes, all of those bullying behaviours, cyberbullying, prejudice-based discrimination that we were talking about a moment ago, but also abuse in personal relationships. Now, teenage relationship abuse is nothing new, but there's a real focus now on the fact that abuse situations can happen far more frequently within relationships than we understand. Physical abuses, the list there, but also both with that and with sexual violence and sexual harassment, where this links then to online behaviours. So not just offline, or now as it's called face-to-face behaviours, but also online. Then, of course, sexual harassment, which we've already spoken a little bit about, but then a couple of other additions. Causing someone to engage in sexual activity without consent, forcing them to strip, touch themselves sexually, or engage in sexual activity with a third party, and then the consensual and non-consensual sharing of news and sending news that we were talking about a few moments ago. So that's your definition of what peer-on-peer abuse is. And as you can see, it's quite wide, and it covers an awful lot of things. And obviously, we're going to be focusing quite a bit on the sexual elements of that, but it does include bullying, it does include cyberbullying, prejudice-based bullying, and discrimination. Okay, also involved those initiation and hazing type rituals that Maurice was talking about, and also upskirting at the top bullet point there, which was made a criminal offence a couple of years ago. And all staff should be clear, this is paragraph 50, as to the school or college's policy and procedures with regards to peer-on-peer abuse, and the important role they have to play in preventing it, and responding where they believe a child may be respond. Okay, so this is fundamentally what you are expected to do. You're meant to have enough knowledge of this so that you can actually prevent it. So we're not talking about reactive safeguarding, we're talking about preventive safeguarding. We're trying to stop things happening before they happen. Yes, of course, we always have to respond when things already have happened, but we're thinking as well here about stopping them happening in the first place. Okay, just a quick show of hands. How many people before this morning were aware of this document? Okay, a small number. Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, that's the May 2018 version. It's now become this, the September 2021 version. And there are some changes to what was there before, so if you were familiar with it, you will find there are some subtle differences. If you weren't familiar with it, then clearly it's important just to let you know what's there. This is for management, but it's also really good for staff understanding to know what's in it and how it impacts on what you do. The other key thing to say about this is I always think the biggest problem with this piece of documentation is actually the title. Because I've known some leaders in some schools look at the title of that and say, okay, we don't need to worry too much about that. If it was to talk about in the title, reference all of the kinds of behaviours which the document actually goes on to explain, far more people would understand that actually this is a much bigger problem. We realise and it involves far more behaviours than we perhaps accounted for. And I'll be coming back to that later. Now, this is the definition of victims and perpetrators. And I don't want you to necessarily focus on that, but also what I do want you to focus on is the addition of the two little essays in that highlighted in red there. Because one of the developing themes over the last 18 months to 2 years has been not only that peer abuse is a real thing, but it happens more frequently than we realise, and frequently when it does happen, there is more than one victim, and there is also quite often more than one perpetrator. And we'll talk a little bit later about the language of victims and perpetrators, because it's not as straightforward as we might think in terms of how people think about themselves. The victim might not see themselves as a victim, and the perpetrator may not understand that they're a perpetrator. And then the other bit that's highlighted in red there. We have to be careful how we talk about this in front of children, not least because in some cases the sexual behaviour will have been harmful to the perpetrator as well. I think sometimes when we hear of these incidents, we drop into victim and perpetrator mode. You're the victim, you're the perpetrator. We deal with the victim in one way, we deal with the perpetrator in a completely different way. Now, to a large degree, that's absolutely right and proper. But we also need to understand, as with bullying behaviours sometimes, that when young people behave in a particular way, sometimes it's an indicator that they themselves are being abused in a different context or a different setting. So we need to have an open mind when we're observing things and reporting things through. Actually, although this person seems to be the perpetrator at face value, there's every chance that this child involved in this abuse could also be a victim in some way, either directly in this scenario or in a wider context. And that's really spelled out this time, for us to understand. And talking about the context, the link to part one of Keeping Children Safe in Education, all start working with children are advised to maintain an attitude of it could happen here. And again, addressing inappropriate behaviour, even if it appears to be relatively innocuous, can be an important intervention that helps prevent problematic, abusive and or violent behaviour in the future. Now, this is important enough in that guidance to be paragraph 2. Okay, it's right at the top. It's one of the very first things. I just want to go through that and really dwell on it for a moment. Addressing inappropriate behaviour, even if it appears to be relatively innocuous. So it doesn't matter whether it seems to be something or nothing. It doesn't matter whether it's something which, 10 years ago we would have just ignored and got on with. It doesn't matter if there might be an explanation or a context to it. It needs to be reported through. And it needs to be reported through for multiple different reasons. One, because it could be an abuse situation and you've got a tiny piece of the jigsaw. 2, because we might have a vulnerable child or children here who need help and support. And 3, because unless we give a clear, unequivocal stand that we don't tolerate those kind of behaviours here, we will risk normalising them, we will risk allowing them to perpetuate. And I think we all probably think back to our own school days and think of the most gruesome things that happened in your school days. Even if your school days, like mine, were relatively uneventful, I can still think of some things that went on that actually, with the lens of 2021, should never have happened. Okay, time to change, time to different. We have to change. We have to be different. We have to give the lead on this. So, relatively innocuous is still above our threshold for reporting. Okay, so what evidence have we got? How do we know about this? Where does all this evidence come from? And the guidance links to all sorts of bits of evidence from the police, from the NSPCC, from the Women and Equalities Committee. Girl Guiding do a fairly frequent survey, which again in 2021 has been linked to guidance, statistical evidence from NSPCC, the CSA Centre and the ONS. So lots of evidence. This isn't just stuff that's been sort of made up. This is stuff which is based on a really secure evidential base as to how big this problem is. And again, we have everyone's invited. There are 51,060 testimonies on there, and that's been relatively stable for quite some time now. So no doubt, in the not too distant future, they'll update the website, and there will be even more. That's 51,000 testimonies. And even if some of them are fantasy or not based on fact, even if 10% of them were, then that still represents 45,000 young people who have had a really damaging and life-changing experience while they were at school. Now, I think our other view is that we always treat all of those allegations seriously and investigate them properly, regardless of what our initial viewpoint is as to whether it's likely or not likely to happen. So 51,000 testimonies on that website. And there are some themes that we'll touch on in a moment. I'm also going to refer back to the Ofsted review, which was commissioned in April as a result of Everyone's Invited. It was published in June, and they visited 32 schools and spoke to 900 children. And you probably think that doesn't sound very many. You've got several hundred children here. It's just like talking to the whole school here. But actually, the two things tied together, all of that other evidence base that I spoke to about before, there's lots of evidence now about what's going on. So, what do we already know? Well, we already knew in 2017 that 64%, that's almost 2 in every 2 girls, aged 13 to 21, had experienced sexual violence or sexual harassment at school or college in the past year. Now, you can't tell me that none of the pupils who have experienced sexual violence or sexual harassment come to this school, because it's just not statistically viable. So it must have happened. 39% had their bra strap pulled by a boy, and 27% had their skirts pulled up within the last week. So we're now clear about the kinds of behaviour we're talking about. It's pulling bra straps, getting in people's face, flicking skirts, tapping boys' genitals. Those are the kinds of things that we are talking about. And they cannot be accepted and they cannot be tolerated. That a third of female students and 6% of male students in INSET schools have personally experienced some form of sexual harassment. There's been a lot of debate about that. Why is it so high for girls and so low for boys? And there are a number of different factors. One of which is girls are more likely to perceive it as being harassment, and boys are less likely to, and are also less likely to report it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't respond. And part of it is educating them about the ways to accept it. And again, a quarter of female students and 4% of males in mixed-sex schools have been subject to unwanted physical touching of a sexual nature. A quarter of female students have been subject to unwanted physical touching. Now, that's quite a chilling statistic. Okay, what did Ofsted find out on top of this? So that stuff there was already in the Sexual Violence and Sexual Harassment Guidance 2018. Let's go way back before everyone's invited. So what did Ofsted find out? So the girls who responded to our questionnaire indicated that these are the kinds of harmful behaviours that happen a lot or sometimes between people their age. So we're talking about non-contact forms of abuse here. Sexist name calling, 92% thought they happened a lot or sometimes. 81% thought that there were lots of rumours about sexual activity. 80% thought they were unwanted or inappropriate comments of sexual nature. So we're not talking necessarily about the number of girls to whom this has happened, but we are talking about the percentage of girls who perceive these as being significant problems that happen either a lot or sometimes. And Robin Fletcher, my CEO, has teenage daughters, and he will seldomly tell you that they are so angry at the moment about everything that's going on. And those of you who have teenage daughters will know this for yourself. They are very angry about what's going on, and they feel that they have been let down by our generation. Those are the words he used to me when we were talking about it last week. So that's the strength of feeling. And they may not tell you to your face, so many of them will, but that's how they feel, and that's what we've got to respond to. And then, in terms of the non-contact forms of abuse or online or on social media, 88% thought that being sent pictures or videos was something that was happening regularly. 80% thought that they or people they knew were being put under pressure to provide sexual images. 73% having pictures or videos they said being shared more widely without their knowledge. 59% being photographed or video without their knowledge or consent. And just over half of the pictures or videos themselves, they didn't know about being social workers. So it's either that they had happened to them or they considered were a problem within their wider environment. And you can see that on the graph. The graph is quite difficult to read from such a long distance. But you can see the difference in perception between boys and girls. The girls are dark blue, the boys are light blue. Okay? So these things happen a lot or sometimes. Boys and girls' perception on these things are different. So let's look then at the contact forms of abuse. Sexual assault, almost 80% felt that sexual assault happened a lot or sometimes. 68% thought that feeling pressure to do sexual things they didn't want to do happened a lot or sometimes within their school environment. 64% reported they thought unwanted touching was going on, etc., etc. Rumours about sexual activity occurring a lot. The older you get, the more it becomes a thing. And clearly, we would all be, I'm sure, wise enough to think that actually rumours about sexual activity, that's no great surprise to us that that happens. But when you put in the context of all of the other information we've got, just how worrying it is, what picture, what part of the picture it's painting. And so again, we see again the girls' perception of these face-to-face activities being, and the frequency with which they happen, being very different in the dark blue from those of boys in that. And again, things like slang and slut and homophobic language being commonplace, staff not being aware, staff dismissing as banter, and this one, let's not have this please at any BSA or SACA member school, certainly not as a piece of law, but staff are not prepared to tackle it. Many were wary of attacking their peers who thought they might dismiss it as banter or as a joke. And again, these are just from individual testimonies from particular schools. But these, I think, are indicative of the kinds of things that start to come through. Catcalling, focus on bodies. Girls being scored out of 10 for attractiveness. Sexist comments in corridors, uncomfortable with boys walking behind them, especially when they're going upstairs and next to boys looking at their skirts. And some boys being anxious about walking upstairs behind a girl in case people might think they're trying to look at their skirts. And so, there are real issues for the boys in this as well. And although a lot of our focus will be on things that happen with girls, we must make sure that we really focus on what's happening with boys as well. Being touched up in corridors of their language. And some were able to name the area where they felt unsafe. Although generally speaking, as we'll see later, the areas where they felt unsafe tend to be areas that are outside school, rather than inside school. Now in the boarding environment, that may be different because they're here 24/7, many of them, but generally speaking, areas where children feel unsafe tend to be outside school. So if people feel physically safe, but there's a clear emotional impact on girls, school leaders should go beyond tackling things in isolation. This is the Ofsted review and should take a broader approach. They should identify hotspots and deal with them. And as I said, feeling physically unsafe is generally related to reports of things outside school. And again, in some schools, the boys and the girls have very different perspectives. Boys either didn't recognise the scope of what was going on, or didn't see it as widespread. Now, I think probably things have moved on a little bit since even April, and that probably because of the amount that's been in the news, boys are certainly very receptive to talking about this. They're very worried about it. They're very concerned about how their behaviour will be viewed. But I think boys are more receptive now than perhaps they've ever been. Although, when the Ofsted review took place, they identified homophobia and racism as being greatest concern for them. And then, pupils who identify as LGBT+, or whether it's special educational needs and disabilities, they have particular problems and are more likely to be targeted. And there's lots of reports there of homophobic and transphobic insults. Some reporting constant verbal abuse and occasional physical assault. And they're more likely to experience it, but less likely to report. Which again is a good. So, what should we be aware of? And moving on to some further paragraphs in that sexual violence and sexual harassment guidance. Can happen anywhere. All staff working with children are advised to maintain an attitude of it could happen here. Should be aware of and respond appropriately to all reports and concerns, including those outside school or college and or online. And again, making clear there's a zero tolerance approach. It's the first time I've seen that in guidance. It's in the guidance now. Having a zero tolerance approach to sexual violence and sexual harassment. And it will not be tolerated. And again, we have those phrases we've seen a couple of times already. Banter, after growing up, boys being boys. Challenging physical behaviour. And then the highlight in brackets, which I haven't picked out in red, potentially criminal in nature. You know, boys, girls, whoever, need to be made to understand that grabbing bottles, breasts, genitalia, pulling down trousers is potentially criminal behaviour. Flicking bras, lifting up skirts, all of these are potentially criminal behaviours. And in our conversations, in our sex and relationship lessons, we need to be exploring this, we need to be making clear what our view is. And again, what schools must avoid, not recognising, acknowledging or understanding the scale of harassment and abuse, and downplaying some behaviours related to abuse, as it can lead to a culture of unacceptable behaviour, an unsafe environment, and in worst case scenarios, a culture that normalises abuse, leading to children accepting it as normal and what can be thought of. And also, we must mention sexual violence and sexual harassment violence. The one thing that's also been made clear this year in the current version is that it absolutely is within the school's remit to tackle behaviours that are going on outside school that impact on what happens inside school. So it's absolutely fundamental that we have the right as a school to deal with it if it's impacting on life within the school, even if it's taking place outside school. That's not been as clear before as it certainly is in this version. So just going to go through some very quick definitions of what we mean by these things: sexual harassment, sexual violence, harmful sexual behaviour, and consent. So sexual violence, again, focusing on happening inside and outside school or college. And these are the four elements to it. The one in red is the one that's been added to the definition this year. So rape, assault by penetration, sexual assault, or causing someone to engage in sexual activity without consent. And then explain what it means by engaging in sexual activity without consent. I think, although we don't want to contemplate it, I think we all understand what we know about what we think sexual violence is. And of course, it's defined by sexual offence about 2003. But sexual harassment is more difficult to tie down. We've talked about a number of things this morning. But fundamentally, it's that phrase there in line 2. Unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. Unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. So if it's not wanted, it's not welcomed by the recipient, then it is, by definition, harassment. And maybe over the years our bar on that has been too high. Okay? Unwanted, it counts, it's in the definition. Both online and offline, and inside and outside of the college. Okay? And again, just highlighting there the things that it can possibly do: violating children's dignity, making them feel intimidated, degraded, humiliated, and the kind of environment it creates, hostile, offensive, or sexual environment. And whilst not the exhaustion of this is what the guidance tells us sexual harassment actually is. Sexual comments, sexual jokes, physical behaviour, deliberately brushing against someone. Now that's a real challenge, because that probably happens in every corridor or every lesson chamber. We need to be alert for it, and we need to make sure that we know where it's happening, and we know that we're dealing with it. Interfering with someone's clothes, displaying pictures, photos, and drawings of sexual nature. So those are the physical behaviours. And then online sexual harassment. Consensual and non-consensual sharing of news and semi-news that I mentioned. Let's skip on. Sharing of unwanted explicit content, upskirting, sexualised online bullying, unwanted sexual comments and messages online, including on social media, and sexual exploitation. So it's quite a broad definition. And I just want to go back to that first bit there: unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. So if you are asked, what do we mean by sexual harassment? That's your clear steer. You can go through the whole list of what sort of things we're talking about: brushing against someone, flicking bra straps, flicking up skirts, flicking genitals, or whatever you like. But actually, come back to that phrase, it gives us a really clear steer about what we're talking about: unwanted conduct of sexual nature. Okay, and then a little bit on harmful sexual behaviours, because there's a really clear link between pupils who are behaving in a sexually harmful way pupils who then go on to be involved in peer abuse. And this is taken from two pieces of research by Professor Simon Hackett. The first one, in 2014, sexual behaviours expressed by children and young people under the age of 18 years old is developmentally inappropriate, may be harmful towards self or others, or abusive towards another child, young person, or adult. That's the definition from 2014. And then, I'm going to put up a slide now that you can spend 10 minutes and we'll be able to lead you through. This is his continuum of harmful sexual behaviours, with normal on the left, right the way across, and violent on the right. And it links in with a number of different tools that you can get from different sources. And your safeguarding team will certainly be able to find them, both from the Brook and from the Lucy Faithful Foundation, where you can do an age and stage appropriate check of whether the behaviour you've seen or you've heard about, whether that fits as being appropriate behaviour for a child at that age and stage. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of things that would be normal. A child aged 14 or 15 masturbating in a solitary way in private without anybody else around would be deemed to be a normal sexual behaviour, part of normal sexual behaviour. We don't like to think about it, we don't like to consider it happening, and if it was happening in a different context, we would certainly like to try and be right the way across the things which are inappropriate, which can depend on the context, and can depend on, sometimes the behaviour, depending on the context, will be normal, but because of the context, it's actually inappropriate. Those which are problematic, those which are abusive, and those which are violent. So a really useful tool, particularly for those who are working with children. So what we're talking about, these sort of red behaviours on our traffic light system, if you like. Excessive, secretive, compulsive, coercive, degrading, or threatening, and those where there's age or developmental difference, or where we're concerned about the type or the frequency or the duration of the context in each behaviour. So those are the behaviours that we're finding as red on our traffic light system. And then one of the big issues that was highlighted by everyone's advice was the issue of consent. It's about having the freedom and capacity to choose, but also, I want you now to imagine yourself as a 16 or 17-year-old, or even a 14 or 15-year-old. And don't just look now at the bare words on the screen, but think about teenage hormonal you and how challenging this is. And how we really have to work on to get them to understand what consent is all about. Consent to sexual activity may be given to one sort of sexual activity, but not another. Consent can be withdrawn any time during sexual activity and each time the activity occurs. Those are the rules about consent. And if we don't educate our young people about that, then we are making it incredibly vulnerable. Some of you will have seen, and I can certainly send a link out if you haven't seen it. A few years ago, there was a video put together talking about consent and likening it to making a cup of tea. Many of you would have seen the picture. Have you seen that? Yeah, a lot of you have. If you understand it's not right to try and give an unconscious casualty a cup of tea, then you understand it's not right to try and have sexual activity with that person. And it can be very useful. It's now a little bit dated, which is why I haven't really used it today. But getting the message out to what is and what isn't acceptable is really important. Someone consents only if he or she agrees by choice and has the freedom and capacity to make that choice. And then there's some real difficulties here. And it's where the word consent gets used in different ways. A child under the age of 13 can never consent to any sexual activity. So anything with a child under 13 is automatically needs to be reported, regardless of what the context is. The age of consent for sexual intercourse is 16. And sexual intercourse without consent as well. Okay, and sometimes it's a little bit confusing now that the meaning of consent and consensual. We've now got consensual sharing of images. Sometimes we get confused, but really clear, the age of consent for sexual intercourse is 16. If there's any behaviour of any child, sexual activity of any kind under the age of 13, then it's automatically something that has to be reported. Okay, so what does the guidance tell us? We've already covered some of these. More likely for girls to be the victims of boys than perpetrators. Any age and any sex. We've talked about that continuum, and if we don't deal with those behaviours at this end of the continuum, we risk normalising them and moving them along, so we now deal with behaviours at the other end of the continuum. It talks about having a whole school approach. It talks about how you respond to reports. and it talks about the fact that victims and perpetrators might not recognise themselves as such. But let's think then about the whole school approach. The schools or colleges safeguarding procedures with regard to sexual violence, I can see the English department will see again, sexual harassment should be transparent, clear, and easy to understand. And this is where you all come in. If you work in safeguarding all the time, or you are the head, or you are on the DSL team, what you think is clear, transparent, and easy to understand might not seem clear, transparent, and easy to understand to those of you who don't do that at your regular page. So if you read any of the documentation that's sent out in the next few weeks, and you don't think it's clear, transparent, and easy to understand, then for goodness sake, say something. Because the last thing we want is in February or March something happens, and when we track it back, it's because someone thought they'd read the policy correctly, but didn't really understand what it meant, but didn't want to say anything because they didn't want to make a fuss. Okay? We're all in this together. And I can't tell you how many phone calls I get from DSLs asking me to look at things and say, what do I think about this? Does this explain? So, if you don't think it's clear and transparent, say something. And systems need to be in place for children to confidently report abuse, sexual violence, and sexual harassment, knowing their concerns are going to be treated and taken seriously. So, what do we do as a school? We make clear it's unacceptable. All of us, all of the time. We don't dismiss it as banter or part of growing up, ever. It doesn't mean we don't try and understand the context. It doesn't mean we don't try and think through what on earth the person was thinking. It doesn't mean we don't work with them to try and explore how they can behave differently, how they can behave better. But we don't dismiss it as banter or part of growing up, and we make clear it's unacceptable. That's no different from many of the other things we deal with in our daily lives. It's part of educating them. It's to educate them to what they should be doing. We challenge inappropriate behaviours, we don't dismiss them, we try and understand the wider social factors, we try and account for the fact that children with special education needs and disabilities, or who identify differently, are more likely to be targeted than any others. And we make sure that staff, we model appropriate behaviours. Probably should have put that on a separate slide, in font size 100, to really highlight that. I don't want to go back to the dim dark days at the beginning of my career, which was so long ago, it was even before the Children Act. But there was some stuff that went on in staff rooms, PE departments, and elsewhere, which if we actually looked at it now in 2021, we would say that's not the kind of behaviour we should ever have tolerated, and it's not the kind of behaviour that's appropriate in front of children. So, what kind of behaviours have we modelled in staff? It's really important. We can't get through this unless we all support each other by the kinds of behaviours we model ourselves. And then, how to respond? Top line, please read. Whether you want to or not, you might be the person who receives the allegation. And you know from your procedures how to handle an allegation. And as part of the response, the school then has to consider how best to keep all those concerned safe. Parents or carers should almost always be contacted. Obviously, talk that through with your DSL team. If you need to contact parents or carers, make sure that that's something to be authorised before you do so, unless that would put the victim at greater risk. Now, we need to think through our thresholds for then, when the DSL team report that through to social care. If it's a crime, it has to be reported to the police. And the wishes of the victim are absolutely paramount, but they have to be balanced against the duty to protect the wider community. The most difficult one there is where the victim doesn't want anything said or anything done, but you know that if nothing is done, then you're left an awful lot of other people's money. And that's where the balance comes in. Things for the DSL to consider, about protecting anonymity. Because one of the problems with this is, we have to keep these things anonymous, but because of social media, everyone knows in 5 minutes. I always reflect back on, and this has nothing to do with the safeguarding case, a child who tested positive for TB at my school. And we weren't allowed to say who that child was. But within 10 minutes, the kids worked out, because the only one who was absent in that year group and from that boarding house. And that year group and that boarding house all worked out. So, pupils are not daft, they will work it out. But our role is to protect anonymity wherever we can. And we've got the risk assessment at the moment. And then there'll be 4 levels of response. Sometimes things can be managed internally. They don't meet the threshold for reporting to social care. Sometimes we need to get early help responses from social care. Sometimes it needs to be a proper referral, and sometimes we have to report to the police. And then online, and this is where I give a steer to all of those working directly with children. You'll be aware of the searching, screening and confiscation guidance, which exists. If not, then it is out there and you can do it. I'm sure it's in your school policies as well. But the guidance gives us a really clear steer. If we've got something that's on a device that is involved in a peer-on-peer abuse situation, then it may be more appropriate to confiscate the device, preserve any evidence, and hand them to police for inspection. So it gives you, if you follow that searching, screening, confiscation guidance, it gives you the authority to confiscate things pending further requirements. Now, I'm pretty sure that people at DFE who write this guidance have never stood in a room trying to confiscate a phone from the 14-year-old. I'm guessing that many of you have. So I don't personally underestimate just how challenging this is. And that's where you need backup, that's where you need support. That's where you need to play for time, that's where you need to store. But you need to be robust and you need to make sure it happens. Because otherwise, there's evidence there that could be disappearing. But on risk assessments, these are the kinds of things that the wider school will think of, but will also impact on you. Considering the victim, especially their protection and support, whether there are any other victims, not just focusing on this case, but thinking about whether there are any other victims, but also considering the needs of the alleged perpetrator and also all the other children, whether we need to protect them from any further harm or from the perpetrator himself. And then, if it's a one-off incident, or whether it's a sustained pattern of abuse, that's something else we need to consider when we're doing our risk assessments. We mustn't dismiss it just because it's taken place within an intimate personal relationship. The bits in red are bits that have been added this year. Are there any ongoing risks? Are there any other related issues? Is there a wider context? And does it link into what Maurice was saying earlier? Are we actually here not really dealing with a peer-on-peer situation? We're actually dealing with a child sexual exploitation or child criminal exploitation scenario. And then the ongoing response. And this is really clear, because this has been a real problem for a while. You shouldn't wait for the outcome of a police investigation before you protect the victim. It's blindingly obvious that sometimes, as soon as social care or the police get involved, it becomes really difficult. So all those of you who are in the business of looking after young people on a daily basis, classrooms or boarding houses, regardless of what's going on, our duty is to protect the victim. We know there are going to be issues around sharing. If they're in the same class, or in the same classes, or in the same boarding house, we know that it might be difficult to take disciplinary action if there's a police investigation going on, but it shouldn't stop us. We need to take into account that there's a process that might prove that actually someone is innocent until proven guilty, that might prove that actually nothing has happened. But again, there are also different thresholds. Remember, the threshold for a criminal investigation to be taken to court, the bar is significantly higher than our behavioural bar in school. So just because the police say they're not going to take any further action, doesn't mean that we as a school can't, on the balance of probability, decide that behaviour was inappropriate and we can act as a result. And we need to be careful about how we turn things, and we need to make sure that, and by no means is this unusual, was an allegation made against a child who was a boarder, who was then out of school for 9 months in the days before Zoom, so homeschooling was really difficult, sending material, attending case conferences on the other side of the country, and after 9 months, the police came back and said, not only have we not found any evidence, not only is there insufficient evidence, we found no evidence that anything happened. I was really grateful to them for giving me that story. 9 months that pupil was out of school. Let's not pretend that any of this is going to be easy. Jurisdiction of things that happen outside school, we now know that we do have jurisdiction, but it can't be easy. The lengthy hiatus in police investigation that I've spoken about, the worries about unfounded or unsubstantiated allegations, the burden of proof for a legal process versus that for the disciplinary process in school, just mentioned. And ensuring that the needs and wishes of the alleged victim are met. And this can sometimes go against what we feel to be the natural process of justice. You know, we're favouring the victim without any clear proof the perpetrator can anything wrong. And if we are, we get stuck in a washing machine now, which is really difficult to get out of. But we then have to go back to that guidance. And that's what the guidance tells us to do. I've had a couple of schools I've worked with quite closely over the last couple of years. There's no easy solution to this. One or other set of parents will absolutely hate you for what you're doing to their child. But if you're following the guidance, that's where you have to do this. If both sets of parents are hating you at the same time, you've probably got the balance just around that. That's not being fit. Very secure. Regardless of the outcome, ongoing management of the school is very difficult. But you need to ensure the best outcome for all parties, including if a school move is agreed. Now, the risk in boarding and the risk in day are different, and there are some real challenges. You need to take account of when the assessment of risk changes. Parental views will be very polarised, and you need to think about how you might signpost parents towards support. When the anonymity bit I mentioned earlier doesn't work, everyone knows who it is, and everyone's pointing the finger. Or if one thinks they know who it is, balancing the needs of the wider community and all of the stuff that's going on social media. Making sure that you report to all of the relevant authorities, clearly not only an issue for most of the people in this room, but just you to be aware of how challenging this is for leadership. There won't always be a solution that's accepted by all. The next one, the school's got to carry on running in the meantime. And if you've got this going on in your form, or in your boarding house, or with a child that you coach, or a child that you are involved in an activity for, that can be really challenging, so let's not underestimate it. Just carrying on with normal things, while all this is swirling around the background, that's really challenging, but we owe it to the rest of the school community to do our best to make that happen. And in my experience, managing the responses to this will be required until that new group's left the school, and possibly even beyond. Because you can absolutely bet your bottom dollar they will become the most strident voices in the long run. And ensure there's appropriate support for the staff. This is where we're all in it together. If you know that one of your colleagues is dealing with a really difficult case in their boarding house form or in the context they work in school, just be there for them. It's really difficult. You don't necessarily need to do anything. Just make sure that they know you've got their support and if you can help. So some final perspectives from the Ofsted review. Again, I said earlier, I could practical the whole of keeping children safe in education, down to that one phrase, act on any concerns. I think I've put the whole of the Ofsted review process down to this one sentence. It shouldn't be our responsibility to say we are to educate. Absolutely right. It's our responsibility to do our best. But we also need to understand that boys may feel guilty all the time. Boys will feel that they're stereotyping. And nearly half of the boys had also been sent sexual images or videos that they didn't want either. So we know from the research it's more likely boys are perpetrators and girls are victims. It can happen in same-sex situations, and it can certainly happen to boys. So let's not polarise our view. We understand the wider context, more likely girls, victims, more likely boys, perpetrators, but it can happen to any age in sex. And then a view from Ofsted that people are really good at identifying harm from adult strangers. We talked earlier about stranger danger. They're less good about what constitutes harm within peer relationships. So unless we help them to explore and work through what proper relationships are like, how do we prevent them from harmful things? If they don't know what they're striving for. And don't forget, go back to that wider context. Many of your pupils will have fantastic role models in their wider life. Their parents, their families, their friendship groups, their sports clubs will be the best of all role models for them. Others will have really awful toxic environments that grow up in. And they will be the behaviours they will be modelling. Where do we learn things from? We learn from those that we are involved with, those that we trust in. And sometimes those messages we're getting are not particularly good. It isn't about sexual behaviour, but there's a guy on BBC yesterday being interviewed, who was a football fan and a racist. And he was turned, self-acknowledged racist. He was turned around by his adult daughter, when she came out, or actually her teenage years, when she came out, by the daughter telling him how abhorrent his behaviour was. So, a real example that not all children grow up with the best role models. Some of them have the strength to react against that, others don't, and others will follow the lead. And some final perspectives. Now, this is again from Ofsted. The need for a well-sequenced ISHE curriculum. So much of the Ofsted testimony is about the fact we do all this stuff and just do it too late. We're teaching them about it in year 10, we can do it in year 8. We really need to think through what we're doing and when. And I know one of the big things that came through testimonies on everyone's invited from prep school children, or who were abused at prep school. Again, the impact that had on them when they went to senior school. And those who were abused at senior school saying, they just told us nothing at prep school. They waited for the senior school to do it, and by that time it was too late. Open discussion areas people find it difficult. So primary and prep schools, things are most likely going on outside school. Very young children are viewing pornography, and very young children, even as young as 8, are sending new pictures. The ease of access to pornography, unhealthy expectations of relationship, have shaped our perceptions of women and girls in particular. And about half of 11 to 16-year-olds have viewed pornography, and probably a significant part of the other half of life. Because it's a click away. It's a click away. If you remember those of my generation, remember viewing pornography involved getting someone who was old enough to look at it to get to the local news agents and be brave enough to buy something off the top shelf. It's a click away now. And the stuff they're getting, they can access, is nothing like Playboy or whatever it was way back then. They can get extreme and graphic pornography at the touch of the button, and many of them do. And Simon Bailey, the police chief lead for child protection, who has just retired from that role, firmly believes that part of the driver behind the rise of peer-to-peer abuse situations is the need to push on people. He's done an awful lot more work on this area than I have, and I'm certainly very well. Research from undergraduates, 1/3 know more about sex and pornography than education. They know it's unrealistic, but 60% of young men and 41% of young women use pornography as a source of information. If you think about what pornography displays, men are aggressive and controlling, women are submissive and sexually objectified, and this can lead to young people viewing it, being desensitized, shape unhealthy attitudes, and can lead to victim blame. Making it the victim's fault is a common theme through lots of the testimonies. And it can lead to a belief that if a woman is affected by alcohol or drugs, she's partly responsible. She asked for it, or by what she wore, or where she was at the time she was there. And these are things in 2021 we absolutely have to change. And as I mentioned a moment ago, none of the children use the term sexy, so we have to update ourselves, and we need to keep the terminology we use up to date as well. And so this is the document I was referring to. You can Google it. Sharing news and sending news, how to respond to an incident. You'll probably find that your pizza's filter will stop you from accessing it. I used to find those DSL notes and stuff I needed, I can never get to school. I had to wait until I got home and access it, which is probably a good thing. But again, I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but if you do come across an image, there are some do's and don'ts, which I think in the remaining 3 or 4 minutes, it's worth just going to. Report it to your DSL or equivalent immediately. Never view, copy, print, share, store, or save the image. Now, I have had, we all get things wrong, I've had a housemaster phone me and say, one of the pupils has just shown me a really appalling image, so I'll copy it and email it to you. And it's like the facepalm emoji, if the facepalm emoji had been around, thankfully, when it went to the investigation, the police didn't deem it to be a particularly awful image. It didn't reach their higher criteria. It was a real learning point. However much you tell people, they don't resist. So, Don't delete the image or ask the young person to delete it. Don't ask young people who are involved in an incident to disclose information relating to it. Don't share the information about the same as again said about an issue. Don't share the information to anybody else you shouldn't share it with. Don't say anything to blame or shame the young people involved. Do explain to them you need to report it, be assured that they will receive support and help you deal with it. I suppose this is really the 2021 equivalent of what we've learned to grow up with in terms of drugs, alcohol, sexual behaviour, if you like. We can tell pupils they shouldn't drink, we can tell pupils they shouldn't do drugs, we can tell pupils they shouldn't smoke, we can talk to them about sexual kinds of behaviour, but we know part of teenage risk-taking is to do those things. So, in the same context, we can tell them that they shouldn't be sharing these images, we can tell them it's illegal, but then so taking cannabis. I think we have to take a realistic view that if we actually take cannabis, we'll have a really robust response. But we know some teenagers do it. And we have to accept that although we don't like it, and we wish they wouldn't, teenagers will, and younger children as well, will take images and will share them, even though information. And generally it only becomes a problem when the relationship breaks down or the person's been sent it to people they shouldn't present it to. So sometimes the image can start here, and it can quite a long time before that image gets used in an inappropriate way, even though it's already been shared a long time ago. And then listening to children's voices, just a couple of slides ago. When I used to work, as you heard, as a safeguarding trainer in Dudley, Metropolitan Borough, and I used to work with a female police officer whose job, before she retired from that role and moved into child protection training, her job was meeting sex offenders. So a really challenging role. And she used to, in her training, used to invite the audience, when we got to this bit of training, to anyone like to volunteer to come and stand in front and talk to everyone about their most intimate sexual experience. And of course, she did once have a volunteer. She had to shut down very quickly. But also the point she's making is, as adults, we find this stuff incredibly hard to talk about. And yet we have this sort of skewed perception that the pupils might want to come and tell us. But of course it's not reality. Yes, hopefully some of them will. But why won't pupils talk about it? Misplaced shame, fear of social exclusion, worry about how the adults will react, next steps out of their control. And part of the reason, worry about how adults will react, part of the reason children won't say that they've received inappropriate images on their phone is that if their parents find out, their parents will take their phone with them. The child's done nothing wrong, they didn't ask for the image, but they won't report it because they know their parents will take their phone. Okay? They're not always listened to or believed. 80% of those who did report had to make more than one attempt. That's according to an SDCT. We've got to be better than that, surely. The young person has got through all of these barriers to actually report, and we still close them down and go, oh my goodness. Boys, disabled children, and those from some ethnic groups face greater threats. It's harder for boys to report than girls, statistically, and those from some ethnic backgrounds just as disabled. And significant barriers remain, slightly hidden by the logos at the bottom. Even where schools have loads of different ways of reporting, there are still significant barriers. So who do they tell? Top of the list, friends. Which is why it's really important that we get that concept that we're all in this together, and we need to help protect the friends. Parents, carers, and then going down the bottom. And the importance of schools teaching, therefore, acceptable behaviour. So if they do tell people in school that they most likely to tell, strangely enough, it's senior staff. But that does mean we need to train all of our staff in best practice. We need to support children at having big problems to trust adults. We need to take time to build trusted relationships with children. Nothing new there. That's all from the Ofsted review. And why do they not report? There's some more bits here. Worried that they're out of their control, they'll be branded as a snitch, they'll be ostracised, damage their reputation, won't be believed, blamed for doing things they were told not to do, feeling nothing will be done. Things are so commonplace that there's no point. And the bottom line, which I highlighted a minute ago, embarrassment and shame, and talking to someone from a different generation of sex. So this is really challenging stuff. And a few more things there. There's no point. And at the bottom, a minority of school children were not believed. Teachers were willing to condone any form of harassment. And in one school, please let's not let anyone in the school do this. Local banter, as it's quoted, you see part of the Okay, got a couple of things to go through. We'll have time. Actually, we can't just do it. So we don't always know what will be done with any information they pass on, so we need to be clear with them. They're worried that if they report something, they'll hold the whole school assembly. And let's be honest, how many times do we do it? You catch one in year 10 smoking, next thing you know, there's a whole school assembly on smoking, or in year 10 assembly on smoking. And that's what they're worried about, they're not daft. If you report something in the school, everyone knows about it. Schools should take a whole school approach to most likely underestimating it. Speak to children, listen to their views and experiences. If ever there was a time for us to be listening, engaged with young people, it is now. I know, I'm sure it happened here as well. Now, I know some heads, as soon as everyone's invited was launched, they were straight into the form groups and boarding houses, talking to young people about how to change. I'm pretty sure that's the kind of possible here. Otherwise, we can ask the things that are sometimes overlooked. If there are other children and young people might be at risk, whether there are spaces outside school or inside school where they are at risk, reacting rather than being proactive, and not always identifying sexual harassment and sexualised language early. And this is another highlight for the review. The concern this review has identified that many instances of sexual harassment, including the pressure to share news and sharing sexual imagery without consent, are going unrecognised or unshunned by school staff. So I hope today has contributed towards recognising it. Your job now is to make sure that you challenge them. And finally, school and college leaders should create a culture of sexual harassment and online sexual abuse and not tolerance. And everyone has a part to play. It can't just be the role of the leadership. And also, finally, in order for all of you to do this together, you have to assume that it's going on, even if there are no specific reports. And you need to all work on your whole school approach to addressing it. And that's it from me. I hope you found that useful. Thanks for listening. I know it's really, really heavy stuff, but don't hesitate to come back to me if there's any further information. I will share all of the slides so you can pick up on those references or review or reading keeping children safe in education. And good luck for the year. I think it's probably different from what we were expecting, but hopefully a little bit more normal than last year. Every good wish for the whole of this academic year.
Dale, thank you very much indeed. Dale is, as you might imagine, an incredibly busy guy. With all the schools that we try to get around, I think we're incredibly fortunate to have been able to secure your time with us here today. So thank you for that one. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Maurice. I just want to say just a very brief few things to surround us. First of all, just to endorse everything that Dale has been saying, especially with regard to an organisational culture and an organisational attitude. Whether you've been in the game for as long as Dale has, for Pre-Children's Act, or 25 years, or just in the last 5 years, I think we've all recognised this massive shift and change in the breadth and the depth and the complexity of these areas. Gone are the days back in 1996, I remember my secondary training was all about paedophiles and the very beginnings of internet pornography, and it's changed. And we've seen that in some of the issues that we've had to deal with in school in the last few years, the range and depth and complexity of those areas, and also the importance of having that wide support that goes around it. I think that the last few years, whether you look at everyone's invited or Me2 or BLM, it's all been leading in many ways in this one sort of unified direction, which I suppose we can wrap up around safeguarding, but also equality and diversity and inclusion, quite how important it is for all of us to play our part. And as Dale said, I think really what we're just doing now is we're going through potentially a painful process and a necessary one, of just acknowledging things that we perhaps always either suspected or actually in truth always known about. And just events in the last few years have made it possible to go forward more clearly. And clearly, this is way beyond simply just the compliance level, of some kind of, regulatory compliance coming up, and therefore we've got to make sure that your description of, HR rushing around and saying that particularly goes way beyond that. It actually goes into that moral duty and that moral purpose of the school. Some of the stuff that Dale said reminded me in my first few months here, I was talking to as many of the pupils at 13, 18 as I could, and a girl who I think was 6 in 2019, she was talking actually, the topic was about sexist language, but in that context, and I've never forgotten the way she described it. It's very similar to something that Dale said. She says, I don't know whether the staff literally don't hear it, and that's why nothing's happening, or they hear it and they don't recognise it for what it is, and that's why nothing's happening, or they hear it, they know exactly what it is, but for whatever reason they're not willing to do something about it. And that really struck a chord with me when I heard a girl talk about that a couple of years ago, and I think it reflects something of what Dale was saying as well. So, if in doubt, report, if in doubt, share, absolutely 100%. So Dale, we're incredibly fortunate to have had you here today. For those at 13, 18, we're back in through Thursday this afternoon. Inclusion labs, so this whole sort of areas that go in the same direction. That's 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Next time we'll all be back in together. But for now, from all of us, Dale, a massive thank you. That's been really valuable.